You've probably heard about how too much of a good thing isn't always a good thing. And I'm going to show you in this video how some of the fats that we call healthy might not be the best and might actually be hurting your performance and causing additional brain fog that you didn't know you had. Brain performance sounds fine and dandy. Sounds great. We all want to perform better. We all want to have that good memory. We all want to have that mental clarity. But let's be real. Let's talk about how it encompasses everything in our life. You know, if our brain isn't performing, then we're not motivated. And if our brain isn't performing, then we don't have extra energy to do the things that we love. And if our brain isn't performing well, then our body flat out doesn't perform well. So I want to show you exactly how omega-6 fatty acids are actually hurting your performance and making you a little bit slower, making you a little bit less motivated, and flat out keeping you from your goals. So let's talk about what omega-6 fatty acids are and why they might cause some inflammation. So we hear all the time we've got omega-3s and we've got omega-6s, and they both sound good. And don't get me wrong, you need omega-6 fatty acids as well. But I want to talk specifically about why they cause so much inflammation within the body. So first and foremost, what's inflammation? So if you've ever been stung by a bee, you know, it gets red, it gets swollen, and sometimes it gets itchy. That's the body's antibody response causing inflammation at that acute site. Now, the same thing happens chronically within your body. So the main way that omega-6 causes inflammation is it acts on something called the cyclooxygenase enzyme, also known as the COX enzyme. And when that enzyme is triggered, it triggers what are called prostaglandins to produce inflammation. So it's just kind of a series of events. But to give you an idea of what happens, omega-6 fatty acids stimulate that COX enzyme. So they literally stimulate the COX enzyme to create more prostaglandins that create more inflammation. And if I can make it even a little bit more clear, if you take a look at what an aspirin does, an aspirin is an anti-inflammatory. Well, an aspirin actually inhibits the COX enzyme from being usable. So that gives you an idea. When you take an aspirin, you're rendering that COX enzyme useless. When you take a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, you're stimulating the COX enzyme. So you're basically doing the opposite of what an aspirin would do. And inflammation can cause all kinds of things within your body. It causes brain inflammation where you don't think well. It causes body inflammation where you get more sore. There's a myriad of things of why inflammation isn't good. But first, before I go any further, it's really important to note that in the Western culture, we consume so much in the way of omega-6 fatty acids, way too much than we should be consuming, because we're getting them from safflower oils, we're getting them from canola oils, we're getting them from all the meats that are fed with grain. We're just getting a lot of omega-6, which means a lot of inflammation, and we're missing out on a lot of brain performance. But don't get me wrong here, we really do need both omega-3 and omega-6. There is a balance of them that we need within the body. But the problem is that when those omega-3s and omega-6 are about to be utilized for what they're really used for, they compete for the same enzyme. So omega-3s and omega-6 are basically competing for the same slot. They're competing for the same slot within the brain, they're competing for the same slot in other activities within the body. So if you've got too much omega-6, the body and the brain are going to prioritize usage of omega-6 because it's in abundance. So that means that we're getting a lot more inflammation because the body is prioritizing the use of the omega-6. Now, if we were to change that pattern and have a lot more in the way of omega-3s, we could essentially tap into a lot more potential that we didn't even know we had because we're flat out not experiencing it. We're not able to really utilize those omega-3s because we're not getting them. Putting things into perspective, the way that our bodies really should run, we should be running on really about a 1-to-2 ratio of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3s. So that means for every 10 omega-6 fatty acids, we should have 20 omega-3 fatty acids. Well, in the Western culture, we're getting about 17 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. So we are way, way, way off, and our brain is prioritizing those omega-6, which means it's full of inflammation and we're not getting the brain energy that we want. What we also have to realize is that our brain prioritizes omega-3 fatty acids instead of omega-6. It has been shown, according to the Journal of Applied Nutrition, Physiology, and Metabolism, that consuming fish oil or omega-3s led to higher levels of docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA, in the hippocampus portion of the brain. Higher levels of DHA within that portion of the brain mean more memory function, more mental clarity, and more focus. So when omega-3s and omega-6s are competing within the brain, and omega-6s are winning, we're missing out on so much of the function that we could get from that DHA acting upon the hippocampus portion of the brain, which means we're missing out on memory and we're missing out on focus. And lastly, to make matters worse, when your brain is operating predominantly on omega-6 fatty acids, it makes the nerve cells stiff. And when nerve cells are stiff, they become a little bit more resistant to neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, which means that the nerve cells just become more resistant to change. So you can't have the positive impacts of serotonin, you can't have the positive impacts of dopamine because those nerve cells are just resistant to it. They become stiff and they become rigid from those omega-6s. This means it's literally harder to get in a good mood, harder to sleep better, and it's harder to get motivated. So what can you do? The simple thing that you can do is start supplementing with fish oil pills. That's really plain and simple. You can also start eating foods that are high in omega-3 fatty acids. Foods like salmon, foods like coconut oils, and foods like other healthy oils that have those omega-3s that you need. The other thing that you can do is take them periodically throughout the day. You see, they're metabolized pretty quick, so you don't need to just take them all at once. Supplement them throughout the day and try to take them with a high-fat meal. If you take fish oil pills with a high-fat meal, it increases the uptake. It's actually been shown that taking fish oil pills with a meal makes it much more effective than taking them on an empty stomach. So that's all you really have to do to start noticing a difference. Because if you're putting omega-3s into your body and you start having that ratio be a little bit better, your body's going to start prioritizing omega-3s over omega-6s. And simply by default, the more omega-3s you eat, the less omega-6s you're going to eat, and you're going to kickstart that process and you'll be off to the races. As always, let me know what other videos you want to see and be sure to subscribe for more ways to benefit your brain, your body, and your business all day, every day. See you soon.